Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales that inspire, move, and remind us of the power of love and transformation. Today, we bring you the incredible journey of Mia and Alex, a story that begins with a cold, calculated bet but unfolds into a heartfelt tale of redemption, empathy, and the strength of human connection. What starts as a marriage of convenience becomes a testament to the idea that even the most unexpected circumstances can lead to profound change. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to join us on today's journey and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. Alexander Brooks was the kind of man who exuded power with every step he took. His tall, confident figure moved through the lavish rooftop party in New York City with ease. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he carried himself with the assurance of someone who had never known failure. From the sharp lines of his suit to the casual sip of champagne he took, everything about Alex screamed control. Yet, beneath the glitz and glamour, there was a certain coldness to his demeanor, an impenetrable wall that kept everyone at a calculated distance. The evening was moving at its usual pace, networking, shallow conversations, and whispers of wealth when Tyler Johnson, Alex's oldest friend, approached him. Tyler was a stark contrast to Alex, with a relaxed smile and a mischievous twinkle in his eye. Holding a glass of wine, he leaned casually against the balcony railing and smirked. "Still believe money can buy anything, Alex?" Tyler asked, his voice carrying the kind of challenge that only years of friendship could permit. Alex turned his icy gaze toward Tyler, raising an eyebrow. "Because it can," he replied, his tone calm yet unyielding. Tyler chuckled, gesturing toward the street below. "Then prove it," he said, pointing to a figure sitting on the sidewalk. There, under the soft yellow glow of a streetlight, sat a young woman. Her bare feet rested on the cold pavement, and her tattered clothes hinted at the hardships she endured. A small, cracked plastic cup sat beside her, a few coins clinking together when a passerby spared some change. "See her?" Tyler asked, his tone laced with intrigue. "That's your next challenge. I bet $2 million you can't turn her into a high society lady and keep her as your wife for 3 months. Alex narrowed his eyes, studying the woman with a detached interest. To him, she was not a person but an opportunity. A chance to prove Tyler wrong. There was no room for doubt in his mind. $2 million. Alex said with a slow, calculating smile. "You clearly underestimate me, Tyler." Tyler raised his glass, a playful glint in his eye. "Then it's a bet." Moments later, Alex was on the sidewalk. As he approached the woman, her hunched figure came into clearer view. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her face, marked by exhaustion, carried a silent strength that Alex did not expect. A piece of cardboard in her thin hands bore the words, "Anything helps." "Excuse me," Alex said, his voice firm and commanding. Startled, the woman looked up, her dull blue eyes meeting his. There was something haunting about her gaze, a mixture of weariness and defiance. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously, shrinking into herself. Alex knelt slightly, leveling their eye contact, and offered her a smile that bordered on condescension. "I have a proposition for you," he said smoothly. "Something that could change your life." Her frown deepened, her suspicion evident. "I'm not anyone's guinea pig," she replied, bitterness lacing her voice. Alex's tone remained steady, unbothered by her resistance. "I'm willing to pay generously. You'll have food, clothes, and a place to stay. All you have to do is marry me for 3 months." The woman blinked, her disbelief almost palpable. "You must be joking," she said, her voice tinged with anger. "I don't joke about business." Alex replied coldly, "This is a marriage of convenience. No real commitment. After 3 months, we part ways, and you'll leave with more money than you've ever imagined." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her life had been a series of cruel twists, dragging her from one misfortune to another. Now, Here was a man with an offer that seemed too outrageous to be true. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "Because you're here," Alex said bluntly, his indifference cutting. Her lips tightened as she considered walking away. But the weight of hunger and the cold night air held her in place. Finally, she sighed. "My name is Mia Carter. If I agree, how do I know this isn't some kind of scam?" Alex pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Moments later, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. The driver, sharply dressed, stepped out and opened the back door. "Get in," Alex ordered. "We'll talk somewhere more comfortable." Mia hesitated, glancing between Alex and the car. The temptation to escape the cold streets, even for a few hours, was overpowering. Reluctantly, she climbed into the car, and Alex followed, instructing the driver to take them to a nearby hotel. The ride was tense and silent. Mia stared out the window, the city lights blurring past, while Alex typed on his phone with casual detachment. When they arrived at the hotel, they were escorted to a luxurious suite. The sight of plush carpets and fine wooden furniture left Mia momentarily stunned. Alex ordered food and fresh clothes to be brought up, his movements precise and unemotional. "Relax," he said, pouring himself a drink. "This is just part of the deal." As the food arrived, Mia ate without hesitation, her hunger overcoming her wariness. Alex watched her intently, his calculating gaze analyzing every gesture. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "do you agree or not?" Mia set down her fork and wiped her mouth with a napkin. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of resentment and desperation. "How much are you paying me?" $1 million, Alex said as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Mia almost choked on her breath. The number seemed unreal. With that kind of money, she could start over, maybe even help others like her. But the thought of compromising her dignity left her conflicted. After a moment, she sighed. "All right, I'll do it." Alex's expression remained unchanged, but there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Excellent. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we begin." And with that, Mia's life took a turn she never could have anticipated. The next morning, Mia awoke in the luxurious hotel suite to the sound of a soft knock at the door. A housekeeper entered, carrying a tray laden with a full breakfast spread and neatly folded clothes. For a moment, Mia blinked at the unfamiliar surroundings. Disoriented, the events of the previous night returned to her in a rush: the proposition, the car ride, and the surreal conversation with Alexander Brooks. As the housekeeper set the tray on the small dining table, Mia eyed the carefully selected outfit. The fabric was far finer than anything she had ever worn, and the muted, elegant colors seemed deliberately chosen to complement her appearance. She hesitated before reaching for the clothes, conflicted by the stark contrast between her old life and this strange new arrangement. Dressed and feeling marginally more composed, Mia found Alex waiting for her in the living area of the suite, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He glanced up briefly, his expression as detached as ever. "Eat," he said simply, nodding toward the tray. Mia sat down at the table, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the opulence around her. The food smelled incredible, and despite herself, she ate quickly. Alex observed her from across the room, his gaze calculating but unreadable. When she finished, he set down his coffee and stood, smoothing the front of his tailored jacket. "We're meeting with my lawyer this morning," he announced. "The contract will be ready for you to sign." Mia's stomach twisted, but she nodded, unsure of how else to respond. What choice did she have? They left the hotel and drove to a sleek office building in Manhattan, where Alex's lawyer, a polished, silver-haired man named Richard, greeted them with professional efficiency. Mia was handed a folder containing the agreement. Her eyes scanned the text, noting the cold, precise language that outlined the terms of their arrangement. Every detail had been considered: her financial compensation, her living arrangements, even stipulations about public appearances. It felt transactional, almost clinical, and yet entirely real. "Take your time," Alex said, his voice devoid of emotion. MIA glanced at him, searching for any trace of humanity behind his aloof demeanor. Finding none, she focused on the document. After several long minutes, she signed her name at the bottom of the contract, feeling as though she were sealing away a piece of herself with each stroke of the pen. The wedding itself was an equally detached affair, held that afternoon in a courthouse. It was over in a matter of minutes. There were no flowers, no family or friends, just the judge, Alex's lawyer, and the driver who had escorted MIA the night before. As MIA recited the vows, her voice was steady, but her heart raced. When the ceremony ended, Alex placed his hand lightly on the small of her back, guiding her to the waiting car. His touch was mechanical, devoid of warmth, but MIA suppressed the urge to pull away. "Where are we going now?" she asked quietly as they drove through the bustling streets. "To my house," Alex replied without looking up from his phone. MIA said nothing more, staring out the window as the urban chaos of Manhattan gradually gave way to the pristine quiet of an affluent suburb. When the car pulled up to a sprawling mansion behind wrought-iron gates, her breath caught. The grandeur of the estate was overwhelming: immaculately manicured gardens, gleaming white columns, and a long driveway that seemed to stretch forever. Inside, the opulence continued: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that looked as though it belonged in a museum. A small team of staff stood ready to greet them, their expressions neutral but professional. Alex gave quick instructions, directing them to prepare a room for MIA. She stood awkwardly near the entrance, feeling like an intruder in this world of wealth and perfection. That evening, Alex invited her to dinner in the mansion's enormous dining room. The table was so long that it felt almost comical. They sat at opposite ends, the distance between them symbolic. "How are you finding everything?" Alex asked casually as he cut into his steak. MIA hesitated, glancing around. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, gesturing vaguely at their surroundings. Alex gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You will be," he said simply. Later that night, MIA sat alone in the room prepared for her. The bed was impossibly large, the linens softer than anything she'd ever touched. Yet, despite the comfort, she couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. She stared at the ceiling, the enormity of what she had agreed to sinking in. Her new reality was a gilded cage, and Alex Brooks, the man who held the key, remained as much of a mystery as ever. And so, with the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, MIA resolved to tread carefully. The life she had left behind was harsh and unforgiving. But this new existence came with its own dangers, ones she couldn't yet fully understand. The days that followed Mia's move to Alex's mansion felt like an endless whirlwind of discomfort and new experiences. Alex wasted no time in beginning her transformation, hiring an entire team of stylists, etiquette coaches, and even a posture trainer. Every morning, MIA was greeted by a sharply dressed instructor ready to mold her into the perfect high society wife. Her first lesson was in posture and poise. The instructor, an older woman named Evelyn, handed MIA a book and instructed her to balance it on her head while walking in a straight line. MIA struggled, the book slipping off with every other step. Evelyn's disapproving sighs echoed in the grand ballroom-turned training space. "Again," Evelyn commanded, her tone sharp. MIA gritted her teeth, her muscles burning from the repetitive motions. As she walked, she caught sight of Alex watching from a distance, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. A surge of irritation rose within her. "Enjoying the show?" she asked, sarcasm dripping from her words as the book fell to the ground once more. Alex raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching as though suppressing a smile. "Just assessing your progress," he replied smoothly. MIA shot him a glare and picked up the book, determined to prove that she wasn't a complete failure. If she had to endure this ridiculous charade, she would at least do so with dignity. The days bled into one another, each filled with lessons on everything from dining etiquette to engaging in polite conversation. MIA learned how to identify the correct fork for every course of a meal, how to nod at just the right angle to appear engaged without seeming overly eager, and how to carry herself with an air of effortless confidence. Despite her resistance, she began to adapt. The stylists transformed her appearance with elegant dresses and subtle makeup that highlighted her features. The woman staring back at her in the mirror each evening was almost unrecognizable, polished, poised, and far removed from the weary figure sitting on the sidewalk just days ago. Yet, beneath the surface, MIA wrestled with feelings of resentment and confusion. While her exterior was being remade to fit Alex's world, her inner self clung to the memories of who she once was. She thought of the friends she'd lost touch with, the struggles that had shaped her, and the unrelenting sense of survival that had carried her through her hardest days. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of training, MIA found herself wandering through the mansion. The vastness of the house was both awe-inspiring and suffocating. With its endless hallways and ornate rooms, she eventually ended up in the library, a quiet space filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books. The silence was comforting, and for the first time since arriving, MIA felt a small sense of peace. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, marveling at their variety. It was clear Alex had a taste for everything from classics to contemporary novels, though she doubted he'd read most of them. As she pulled a book from the shelf, she heard the door open behind her. Turning, she saw Alex step inside, his usual composure firmly in place. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his tone surprisingly soft. MIA shrugged, clutching the book to her chest. "Not used to all this space." Alex nodded, leaning against one of the shelves. "It takes time." There was something in his voice, an unspoken understanding that caught her off guard. For a brief moment, the air between them felt less tense, almost human. "Why do you care so much about winning this bet?" MIA asked, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. Alex's expression hardened slightly, and he crossed his arms. "It's not about the bet anymore." "Then what is it about?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Proving something. To myself." "Maybe." MIA studied him, trying to decipher the man behind the carefully constructed mask. She wanted to press further, but something held her back. Instead, she nodded and turned her attention back to the book in her hands. "Good night, Alex," she said softly, making her way toward the door. "Good night, MIA," he replied, his tone carrying an edge of vulnerability she hadn't expected. As MIA walked back to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alex Brooks, for all his arrogance and control, was hiding something deeper. And though she didn't trust him, she found herself curious about the man who had brought her into his world. The mansion, with all its grandeur, felt less imposing that night, but MIA knew better than to let her guard down. Trust, if it ever came, would not be given lightly. The days continued to blend together in an endless cycle of lessons, formal dinners, and carefully orchestrated appearances. MIA found herself caught between two conflicting realities, the gilded luxury of her new life and the haunting memories of her old one. As much as she tried to focus on the present, her past lingered, a shadow she couldn't escape. It was during a quiet evening that the memories came rushing back with a force she hadn't anticipated. MIA had retreated to her room after another long day of etiquette lessons. She sat by the window, gazing out at the perfectly manicured gardens, her thoughts wandering. As she stared at the moonlit landscape, a face flashed in her mind, Alex's face. But younger, colder, and sharper. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. She had met Alexander Brooks before, years ago, Back then, she had been a bright-eyed, hopeful young woman, clutching a carefully prepared resume as she stepped into the towering office building of Brooks Enterprises. The memory was vivid, the nervous flutter in her chest, the meticulously ironed blouse she had worn, and the way her palms had sweated as she waited in the sleek, impersonal lobby. When she was finally called into the interview room, Alex had been there, sitting behind an imposing desk. He had barely looked at her as she spoke, his attention seemingly fixed on the papers in front of him. When he finally did glance up, his gaze had been piercing, his words dismissive. "We don't have time for amateurs," he had said, his tone cutting and final. Those 6 words had shattered her confidence. She had left the office humiliated, her dreams of working in a prestigious firm crumbling to dust. It was a turning point in her life, the moment when everything had begun to spiral downward. Now, as she sat in the opulence of his mansion, the irony of it all was suffocating. The man who had dismissed her so callously was now her husband, albeit in name only. The next morning, Mia awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't let this revelation sit idle in her mind. She needed answers. She waited until late in the evening, when Alex retreated to his study. Gathering her courage, she made her way down the grand staircase and through the labyrinth of hallways. The door to the study was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open, stepping inside without knocking. Alex was seated at his desk, his attention focused on a set of documents. When he looked up and saw Mia standing there, he frowned. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Do you remember me?" Mia asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Alex tilted his head, confused. "Of course. We've been living under the same roof for weeks." "That's not what I mean," Mia said, crossing her arms. "I mean before all this. Before the bet. Before the marriage. Do you remember meeting me years ago?" Alex's frown deepened. "Should I?" Mia's chest tightened. She had braced herself for indifference. But his lack of recognition stung more than she expected. "I came to your office once," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I applied for a job. You didn't just turn me down, you humiliated me." Alex's expression remained unreadable as he leaned back in his chair. He seemed to be searching his memory. But when he spoke, his words were like a dagger. "I interview dozens of people every month. I don't remember all of them." The casual dismissal reignited the anger Mia had buried for years. She clenched her fists, her voice rising. "Of course you don't. People like me don't matter to you. We're just disposable. Aren't we?" For a moment, Alex was silent. His gaze softened. But he didn't move. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low. Mia wasn't sure if the apology was sincere or simply an attempt to end the conversation. Either way, it wasn't enough. She turned on her heel and left the study, her heart pounding. Back in her room, she paced restlessly, her mind racing. The confrontation had only deepened her frustration. She wasn't sure what she had hoped to achieve. But one thing was clear, the wounds Alex had inflicted all those years ago had never fully healed. As the night stretched on, Mia sat by the window once more, staring into the darkness. For the first time since agreeing to Alex's proposition, she questioned not just him, but herself. What had she gotten herself into? And was there any way to come out of it unscathed? Mia woke the next morning feeling drained, her confrontation with Alex replaying in her mind like an unwelcome melody. She tried to shake it off, but her emotions clung to her like a second skin. As she dressed and headed to breakfast, she resolved to keep her distance from Alex for the time being. She couldn't let herself be drawn into his web of indifference again. The dining room was quiet when she entered. Alex was already seated at the far end of the long table, his usual coffee and newspaper in front of him. He glanced up as she walked in, his expression as impassive as ever. "Good morning," he said, his tone neutral. Mia gave a small nod and sat down. keeping her eyes fixed on her plate as the staff served her breakfast. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional clink of silverware. As she sipped her coffee, Mia couldn't help but steal a glance at Alex. There was something different about him today, something she couldn't quite place. His usual air of invincibility seemed muted, as though the previous night's confrontation had chipped away at his armor. "I've arranged for us to visit one of my company's social projects this afternoon," Alex said suddenly, breaking the silence. Mia looked up, startled. "Why?" Alex set down his newspaper and met her gaze. "Because I think it's something you might appreciate," he said simply. Mia hesitated. She wasn't sure what his motives were. But the idea of stepping out of the mansion and seeing something real, something meaningful, was too tempting to resist. "Fine," she said, her voice carefully measured. That afternoon, they drove into the heart of the city, leaving behind the polished perfection of Alex's world. The contrast was striking as they entered a neighborhood filled with aging buildings and bustling streets. Alex parked the car outside a modest community center, its faded sign barely visible against the brick facade. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and lively. Children played in a small activity room, their laughter echoing through the halls, while volunteers handed out meals in a makeshift cafeteria. Mia felt an immediate sense of connection to the place. It reminded her of the shelters she had frequented during her hardest times. Alex introduced her to the center's director, a kind-faced woman named Patricia. "This center provides support for underprivileged families," Patricia explained. "We run educational programs, job training workshops, and food drives." As Patricia spoke, Mia noticed Alex watching her closely. It was clear he was gauging her reaction. But for once, his gaze lacked its usual cold detachment. "Would you like to help serve lunch?" Patricia asked, her tone gentle. Mia nodded, grateful for the opportunity to do something tangible. She joined the volunteers behind the serving counter, handing out plates of food to a steady stream of people. Each face she saw reminded her of the struggles she had once faced, struggles that felt like a lifetime ago, despite being so recent. At one point, a young boy approached the counter, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you a princess?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Mia laughed softly, shaking her head. "Not even close," she replied. Alex, who had been standing nearby, smirked at the exchange. "You're doing well," he said quietly as the boy walked away. Mia shot him a skeptical look. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It is," Alex said, his tone sincere. For a moment, Mia didn't know how to respond. The sincerity in his voice was disarming, and she found herself wondering if this side of Alex, the one who cared enough to bring her here, was the real him, buried beneath layers of arrogance and pride. By the end of the afternoon, Mia felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they left the center, she turned to Alex. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice soft. Alex hesitated, his expression unusually vulnerable. "Because I wanted you to see that I'm not just the man you think I am," he said. "And because I thought you might find something here that resonates with you." Mia studied him, her emotions a jumble of confusion and curiosity. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of humanity in Alex, a hint of the man he could be if he let himself. The ride back to the mansion was quiet. But it wasn't the tense silence Mia had grown used to. It felt almost comfortable, as though an invisible barrier between them had begun to crack. That night, as Mia lay in bed, she found herself thinking not just about the people she had met at the community center but also about Alex. Perhaps there was more to him than she had given him credit for. But even as her thoughts softened, she reminded herself to be cautious. Trust was not something she could afford to give lightly, not yet. The next morning, Mia awoke to a pale stream of sunlight filtering through her curtains. She stretched and sat up, the memory of the previous day at the community center still vivid in her mind. For the first time since arriving at Alex's mansion, She felt something other than resentment. It wasn't quite trust, but it was a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. When she came down for breakfast, she found Alex already seated at the table. As usual. Today, however, he wasn't reading his newspaper. He looked up as she entered, offering her a faint smile. "Morning," he said, his tone lighter than usual. "Good morning," Mia replied cautiously as she took her seat. The staff brought out their meals, and for a while, the two of them ate in silence. But it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence that had characterized so many of their earlier interactions. This silence felt different, almost companionable. Alex was the first to speak. "I have a meeting later this afternoon, but I wanted to talk to you before I leave." Mia glanced at him. Her curiosity piqued. "About what?" He set down his fork, his expression serious. "Yesterday, at the community center, I saw something in you. You were comfortable there, more so than I've ever seen you here." "Why?" Mia hesitated, her instinctive defenses flaring. But then she thought of the boy who had asked if she was a princess. The warmth of the volunteers, and the shared sense of purpose she had felt while serving lunch. "Because it felt real," she said finally. "Those people, what they're going through, it's not that different from what I've been through. I understand them in a way I don't think you ever could." Alex leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "You're right. I don't understand. Not like you do." His admission caught her off guard. She had expected him to argue or brush off her comment. But instead, he was listening, really listening. "So what are you saying?" Mia asked, folding her arms. "I'm saying that I want to do more," Alex said. "I've always written checks to charities, funded projects, but I've never been involved. Yesterday made me realize how disconnected I've been." Mia raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "And what does that have to do with me?" Alex hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I think you can help me. You have a perspective I don't. If we worked together, I believe we could actually make a difference." The sincerity in his voice took Mia by surprise. She searched his face for any sign of manipulation, but all she saw was honesty. It was unsettling, but also oddly reassuring. "I'll think about it," she said, her tone measured. Alex nodded, respecting her reluctance. "That's all I'm asking." As the day progressed, Mia found herself reflecting on Alex's words. She couldn't deny that he had changed, if only slightly, since the day he had approached her on the street. There was a vulnerability in him now, a willingness to admit his flaws. That hadn't been there before. That evening, Mia decided to visit the art studio Alex had arranged for her. It was a small, sunlit room tucked away in a quiet corner of the mansion, filled with canvases, brushes, and paints in every color imaginable. At first, she had avoided the space, unwilling to accept the gesture. But now, as she stood in the doorway, she felt a strange pull toward it. She spent hours painting that night, losing herself in the rhythmic strokes of the brush. The act of creating something from nothing brought her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. By the time she finished, the canvas before her was a vibrant depiction of a sunrise, bold, hopeful, and full of life. When she finally returned to her room, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from Alex. "Thank you for considering my offer. I know trust takes time, and I'm willing to wait. But no matter what you decide, I hope you'll continue to find moments of peace and purpose, whether it's through art or something else entirely. Alex." Mia read the note twice, her emotions swirling. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt genuine. For the first time, she wondered if Alex's transformation was real or if she was just letting herself believe it out of hope. As she placed the note on her bedside table and turned out the light, she realized she didn't have an answer yet. But for now, the question itself felt like progress. The walls she had built were still standing, but they didn't feel quite so insurmountable anymore. In the end, Mia and Alex found something neither of them had expected: true partnership. The journey from mistrust to understanding had been long and fraught with challenges. But through each trial, they discovered the power of vulnerability and the strength in empathy. Together, they transformed their lives and the lives of others, turning Alex's wealth into a force for good and Mia's resilience into a beacon of hope for many. Their love story wasn't perfect, but it was real, a testament to the idea that people can change when they are willing to face their flaws and embrace growth. Standing hand in hand, they looked toward the future, knowing that their love had been forged in the fires of struggle and redemption. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories for more emotional and inspiring content. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.